Welcome back, San Antonio Spurs fans. Today, we've got an amazing episode for y'all. We're going to be talking NBA draft in the San Antonio Spurs with two extra special guests. We've got Tom Petrini, we've got Evan Closky from News 5 San Antonio and the Big Fundamental podcast. How are you doing, guys?
Doing well. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you guys doing?
Good. I'm doing excellent. I'm really glad that y'all are able to join me here. It's always a pleasure to talk to people within the business. You know, I got News 5 people here, so I feel real legitimate talking to people who know what they're talking about. And we're talking draft, and it's draft season, so I'm super excited to get this started.
Yeah, I mean, we're a week away. Draft is in 1 week, and then free agency starts, and we'll know about tomorrow before the draft, and then they're going to play in like 2 months or less than that. So,
and not to mention, I was saying this before you got on, Tom, but the feeling around this draft, it's like over studying, right? Like we reached a point where we just know everything about these prospects. And the only problem is we don't know enough about these prospects still because we're dissecting a limited amount of film for some of these guys and, you know, same old. So it's like just to finally get to draft day is remarkable.
and I know you're not the only. I know that a lot of teams feel that way because there are just so many question marks with this, even in the top 10, right? I mean, there's no clear-cut number one guy, and there's going to be a lot of movement and there's a lot of volatility in that top 10. And then past that, I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen after pick 11. There are some guys who you have a reasonable level of certainty will still be there when the Spurs pick. You have some guys you have a reasonable level of certainty they'll be gone before the Spurs pick, so they need to trade. And we've been hearing some stuff about potential trades. But at the end of the day, this is a very interesting draft that I'm sure a lot of teams just want to get past because the questions give them anxiety too because they have to answer them. So, you know.
Yeah, this is going to be a wild draft class. This draft class, like y'all said, all these players are so close in talent. It's almost negligible at some points. We have no idea what's really going to happen. Some guys could fall. We've seen some guys rise throughout the class. And most importantly, we've been hearing all these rumors, right, about the Spurs potentially moving up. And, you know, sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. But with the Spurs, you know, traditionally we think of them as a team that values continuity, somebody who doesn't make very many trades. And I'm kind of hoping they do. So I just wanted to read off a few names. So we know that Denny Avdia, Patrick Williams, Aaron Nesmith, Terry Armstrong have all worked out for the Spurs. Onyeka Okongwu has met with the Spurs. And then we know that Killian Hayes, Jalen Smith, Isaac Okoro, and Tyrese Halliburton have interviewed with the Spurs. And a lot of those names are guys who probably won't be in their range. And I find that really interesting because that kind of feeds into that rumor that, you know, the Spurs may be looking to move up. So my first question for y'all is, how likely do you think it is, you know, that Pop in the front office are looking to make a deal to move up? And have you guys heard anything about them being kind of high on somebody?
So if I can start here, this question was posed to us like, what was it, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago by Jackson on Big Fun. And we both kind of laughed and we were like, yeah, I mean, it's the Spurs. They're probably not going to do anything. For me, at least, the past couple weeks, my view on this has kind of changed in the sense that there's just too much whispers and smoke for there to not be something behind it. There's too much chatter, and a lot of it is amplified and echoed, and a lot of it is, you know, people can put too much stock into. You know, the report that the Warriors, for example, want to trade the number 2 pick for LaMarcus Aldridge, a deal centered around that. I mean, Zach Lowe said he got a text message and he said he didn't understand that text message. And then I think that's been all of the reporting about that potential trade. I just saw something recently, like, you know, a couple of the aggregation accounts just put out like, oh, ESPN says the Warriors are interested in putting out a trade for LaMarcus Aldridge. That might just be repackaging what Zach Lowe said a week ago. So, you know, I don't know how much to put into that, but it does kind of make sense. I mean, for both parties involved, right? Because if the Spurs really want somebody who's up there in this draft, if they want a Wiseman, which we don't know any reporting on that, but Denny and Okongwu, there's a chance Okongwu goes down to 9. There's a chance Denny maybe goes down to 6, but there's no chance the Spurs draft either of those guys without trading up. And so for there to be interest with prospects like that, there has to be some interest in finding a deal to move up, whether it's a couple of spots or all the way up to 2. And every other team has like really specific trade rumors. Like they're trying to trade Russell Westbrook to the Sun. They might trade Russell Westbrook somewhere. They might trade Chris Paul to the Suns. The Spurs, it's like they might do something, and everyone's like, ah. But that's as juicy a rumor for the Spurs as we get. So I mean, what are you gonna do?
No, and I agree with where there's smoke, there's fire stuff. I'm always one of those people where you start hearing it a couple of times, there's probably some validity to the rumors. Now, what the rumors are telling us is sort of what Tom kind of had to say there. I'm always a very big skeptic when it comes to what we hear pre-draft. You have to remember that GMs, coaches, whoever, are working media sources to learn about other people. They're also working media sources to plant seeds of BS out there for other people. There's a whole litany of reasons of how front offices can utilize the media to project a certain path. And, I've gone down these wells of just different ways that, if the Warriors were looking to make a deal with somebody and they wanted to plant a story out there that said, hey, we're looking elsewhere. And then boom, a story pops up, LaMarcus Aldridge, another team that maybe wants to make a deal with the Warriors. Like, do I want to believe this? Do I not want to believe this? You just never know. So while I do agree that the Spurs are definitely doing their due diligence, as they should, with players like LaMarcus and DeMar, who are very much front and center, possibly being dealt 1-year contracts as of now. We don't know what's going to happen with DeMar, but my guess is the Spurs as an organization for such a long time have never needed to make calls or to do anything because they were set for such a long time with 3 Hall of Famers. Now GMs are getting calls from Brian Wright and they're going like, what are these guys up to? I don't trust them. I don't trust them one bit. And I just think that maybe there's a part of this where the Spurs are just joining the fray in like doing something of like just of note.
And that's just so weird to everybody else.
It makes everybody so uneasy. Like I know, like it's no secret that people they love the Spurs. They know that the Spurs are smarter than most. They know they're a step ahead. And if they're doing something, making calls, they're wondering, why are they doing it? Who are they interested in? Because should that be somebody I'm interested in? So I think that I think the Spurs are active. Whether they do something or not, I don't want to run away with that. I think they're active right now, which is more than what we're used to from them as they kind of lay low and do their thing in peace.
Yeah, and I mean
that might be the thing is. Go ahead.
Yeah, fans are going like crazy on Twitter. I've been on Twitter a bunch today, and it's like they're ready to trade anyone and everyone to move up. And I think that's funny, but I also think that you got to have a little bit of stock, like buy into the stock of the Spurs making a deal, because with this draft cycle, they only get 10 in-person visits with prospects, and they've spent half of them. And most of those guys are going to be out of their range. So I think for me, that gives me a little bit of hope, a little bit of reason to believe that the Spurs are interested in moving up. And you're right, whether or not they do so, that's kind of unknown. We don't know, but it definitely gives me some hope that they're at least thinking about it.
Yeah. And so I'll say this, that it obviously matters that they're looking at guys like Denny and Okongwu, guys who nobody's projecting to ever sneak to them. Very important in case they do trade up. I will also say, theoretically, let's say they don't work out LaMelo or Anthony Edwards. If you were to then do like 3 through 12, I mean Armstrong doesn't fit that either. So whatever. But theoretically, you can work out everybody in that range and know you're getting one person. So being 11, you can kind of have your reach pick. You can have some guys maybe you're looking at the back end, and then you can kind of hone in on a bunch of those middle people and then there's there's also the element of not working out guys that you want to keep a secret, or, try to make teams feel like, hey, like, we know they're not going to take them. I don't know what it might be. But, just to kind of play a little bit of a devil's advocate on that, I do agree, though, that it's very interesting they're working out guys like Denny and Okongwu, because that certainly lends itself to an idea of trading up, because there is a very, 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 very slim chance, if any, that those two are going to be there at 11, like 0.1.
Definitely.
You just hit the nail on the head on why Saddiq Bey hasn't worked out with the Spurs yet. Obviously, they're trying to keep that a secret. But yeah, I just want to say on possible trades, I don't think they would trade a member of the young core, and I think they would be more opportunistic than pure aggressive in terms of pursuing a trade. Like, it might come down to draft night where they can put something together, and because they've had those feelers out there, and because they've been kicking the crap out of these tires for the first time in 20 years, they're out kicking the same tires as everybody else, but they're figuring out what other teams are interested in and trying, at least. If there's a way for them to get up a couple of spots, if a guy they like is sliding, or I don't know if they'll go for that big home run deal, but if they do, I think they're going to try to, maintain that young core. And, if they have to take on a Andrew Wiggins contract, find somebody else to do it, that's another part. But, it wouldn't shock me at all if the Spurs figured out a way to go up a little bit, and reach a bit in this draft.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either. And I actually think that's an interesting point that you make about them valuing their young core. And it kind of leads me into my next point, where I'll read y'all my draft big board. I saw you wrote something today about, your prospects that you like. I enjoyed that. There were a lot of really good points you made, but I'll read you who are my top 14, just my lottery. So it's not too many people. We've got Killian, then we got Ball, we've got Anthony Edwards, we got Denny, Vassell, Okongwu, Okoro, Wiseman, Pokashevsky, Toppin, Lewis, Patrick Williams, Halliburton, and Desmond Bane. And I like a lot of those guys, and I'm high on a lot of guards. And I'll give you a draft philosophy of mine. If you're in the Spurs position, right? You have DeJounte, you have Derek, you have Lonnie, you have Keldon, you have Kendary, even if you want to include him in there. You have a lot of good assets. But to me, you don't have that star player who's going to be the engine that makes your team run. So if I'm looking at this class, if somebody like Killian Hayes is there, or if somebody like Kyra Lewis is there, or if somebody like, Halliburton is there at 11 and they decide not to move up, I think it's worth giving a look to those guys. Now, if somebody like Patrick Williams or, Obi Toppin are there, who's a better positional fit, but still gives you some upside, I think then it makes sense to maybe take the positional fit. But otherwise, I think it's still in their best interest to take best player available if that guy's a guard, even if Spurs fans really are tired of seeing guards come to San Antonio, because I think there are some guys who are maybe close to what some of the Spurs guards are now, and they have a higher ceiling. And I'd love to, kind of hear what y'all think about that.
Well, and we heard it from even from Popovich, right? Everyone says like the notion of 1 through 5 is kind of over, but the idea of like guards and big, like just our traditional sense of what these players are is just sort of done. Like there are playmakers, and then there are guys that play in the post, and just the game is evolving into having just perimeter players, on ball handler. Like it's just whatever way we grew up imagining the sport of basketball and how we were sort of taught this regimented system is kind of breaking away. I think my philosophy with the Spurs, especially a team that's a small market team, when you enter drafts, you need to get the best player available. I'm not somebody who, and in this draft, I think, if there's a tiebreaker, then I go to need, right? So if we're there at 11 and I'm stuck between Vassell and, throw a guard out there. I don't know. Let's say Killian Hayes is there. If you are if you had them right here on your board, then I take Vassell. That's where I would break the tie. On the little bit of a need basis, just to allow yourself to make that pick. But if you get to 11 and Killian Hayes is there and you got him up here and Vassell is here, like I'm not taking Vassell here. I'm taking Hayes and I'm just running with that. And whoever the Spurs value the most at that pick is who they should take. It's a star-driven league. We have seen it with the Spurs. Why have they been relevant for all of these years over time? Because stars, from David Robinson to Tim Duncan, I mean, they're just from era to Kawhi. And then you see Kawhi removed and all the, deficiencies that are surrounding there. So you have to do whatever you got to do to bring a star in. And that is what's making this offseason so tough, because I don't know if you necessarily can find that in the draft, but maybe you can concoct some sort of deal to revolve, and make something happen. But yeah, long story short, I kind of agree with you that Spurs fans are going to be yelling for forward, whatever they want a wing, and there are a lot of really good wings in this class. I think that would fit their need and their wants. I'm not going to blame them if they go for a guard that they love, because I still think a guard will fit in their system. Maybe DeMar won't be there anymore, but you can play for, guards-ish and still make life work and spread things out and work out. And we don't have to get through the nitty-gritty, but yeah, that's where I stand as well.
So I kind of disagree. Just in this draft in particular, I think it's more so, the environmental factors, because you've got all the volatility, right? But I basically see two tiers of guards in this draft for the Spurs at 11. There are guards who they would kind of be reaching a little bit if the Spurs picked them at 11. And to me, that's Kira Lewis and Killian, if there are other wings available. But, like say Vassell, Pat Williams, and Okoro, all of the wings, the top, 6 or 7 wings are gone, and there's, the best player available is clearly guard. Then it makes sense for the Spurs to take him. But just with the math of it, somebody on the wing is going to have to fall to the Spurs, and I think the best player available, just because of the math, is going to be a wing, because you've got, Kira Lewis and Killian Hayes down here on my board, and then a bunch of wings, and then Anthony Edwards and LaMelo Ball and Halliburton a little bit below them, kind of more in the middle.
So what if Halliburton dropped to 11?
If Halliburton drops, I think you probably have to take him. He's sort of that one guard who is out of reach but could fall. Because Anthony Edwards and LaMelo Ball not falling. And I don't think the Spurs are going to make a trade to acquire one of those guys. And I think if you look at the wings in this draft, I have a list of 5 guards and 10 bigs and wings. So say LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton, for the sake of argument, are all gone. That means you're going to get at least one of Devin Vassell, Patrick Williams, Isaac Okoro, Saddiq Bey, maybe Obi Toppin. Mm-hmm. And I think if it comes down to that versus Killian, and that's assuming, the Knicks don't take Killian, that's assuming he doesn't go higher, which he very well could. If 4 guards go in that top 10, then 2 of those wings become available. Mm-hmm. And the guard pool gets worse. So I personally would be happy with any of those guys that the Spurs would take at 11. I think Saddiq Bey is probably like as close as you can get to hitting the nail on the head of a guy that's probably going to be there at 11 and would probably be like pretty fair value for the pick, and like would be a good solid wing player. I would rather have a Saddiq Bey than a Killian Hayes. But the Spurs are apparently high on Killian Hayes.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the big thing too, is, I think that you and I, that I'm a big Killian Hayes fan. So it all, and that's the thing, it's all about preference, which is why I specifically say just whatever if the Spurs in their room love Killian Hayes and he's there at 11, I think it's okay to grab him if that is a player that they're in love with.
Right. But I don't
You
think they trade up to get him.
No.
I don't think they
Yeah,
trade up
I'm
to
not.
get
I'm not.
him.
I'm not trading up for a guard. I'll say that. If you
Exactly.
think that, yeah, if you think that, like, let's just say James Wiseman. If you think James Wiseman is a player that can alter the direction of this franchise moving forward, go for it. But I don't see them trading. Like, they're not going to do a LaMelo deal, so I'm not even going to worry about that. And Anthony Edwards, I don't see that either. I mean, for a number two, like, we're a year removed from Ja Morant being the number 2 overall pick, who could not have been a more slam dunk at 2. A lot of people be like, just be like the Grizzlies. Just be like the Grizzlies. It's like, okay, well, can you give me a number 2 pick with a guy who was in a class of Zion Williamson, who would have been the number 1 almost every other year outside of that specific class? Like, there's luck that goes into being the Grizzlies. Like, Brandon Clark is great, don't get me wrong, and they were rebuilding. But if they don't get the number 2 pick last year and they get Ja Morant, that team is right back to the bottom entering this draft. It takes a little bit of that luck. If you think Okongwu was that game changer, then go for it. So yeah, I don't foresee them trading up for those 2 guards to necessarily say, let's make a big move. I can see them trading up for a wing or a big man and saying, like, this is the guy that's going to lead us forward, and we have a plan in place for that. So, to that, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying about Saddiq Bey. I think he's a solid guy. I think he's someone who has limited upside, and I think he gets a little bit more credit than he deserves as a defender. A lot of times he was guarding the best player on the other team, and a lot of times he got exposed. And they had a really good team defense at Villanova, and I'm someone who puts a lot of hours into watching the college games. I'm familiar with a lot of the high school prospects going into college because that was one of the things that I specialized in as an intern in college. So I've watched a ton of these guys. I've seen a ton of their film. And I like Saddiq Bey, but I can't help but feel he's a little bit of a reach at 11. He doesn't have a lot of self-creation potential. He's got a functional handle, but not somebody you would want with the ball. He's a knockdown shooter for sure, but he's not someone who is going to be running off a ton of screens or shooting off movement, and it's not someone who's going to get his own shot. So I think there's just such limited potential with Saddiq Bey that I think he fits somewhere perfect that has the infrastructure like a Golden State, right? Where they have those star players you can play off of. Then I think his value is immensely boosted by them. But with the Spurs, I don't think they really have that. Even with like DeMar, I don't think it really makes his value all that much better by being able to stretch the floor for the Spurs there. So that's kind of where I'm hesitant with him. That's why I have him a little bit lower. I have him at about 18 on my board. But I like Killian Hayes a lot because he's someone who is very young, showed poise in one of the toughest leagues in the world. He's played in EuroLeague. He's starting for a team that plays in the EuroLeague that's competitive, had good percentages, made some really incredible passes. So that's why I'm really high on Killian, his age, his skills, his potential. And he's also a very solid team defender, has good instincts as a defender. But I agree. I don't think the Spurs are going to move up to get a guard because they do already have DeJounte. They do have Lonnie. They do have a Keldon or a lot of different guys. So I don't necessarily think they will trade up. But again, I think if he's there at 11, and like y'all have mentioned, and it's a tie between some guys, or maybe it's a little bit further, I think you got to go with Killian over a guy like Saddiq Bey, even if he is there. But that's
if it comes down to that, I'm sure at least half of Spurs Twitter will kill the Spurs for taking Saddiq Bey over Killian Hayes. I'm sure that's how that would play out. And I hear what you're saying with Bey. I think I'm less worried about his limited shot creation because positional need. I don't think the Spurs need like a point forward. Essentially, I think he'll be fine as a secondary playmaker. And a floor spacer, a guy to set screens and roll and pop and just be like a functional piece of the offense. He won't need to do too much. I think a lot of his struggles at Villanova were because Jay Wright was like, I run the offense through Saddiq Bey, I run the defense through Saddiq Bey, and so he put him in a lot of situations where it's not that he was asked to do too much, but he was pushed to his limits, guarding guards and, hey, go get a bucket, when that's not really what he does at a high level. I think a reduced role, a more focused role in the NBA, and especially the type of role that he would play on a Spurs team with Derek White and DeJounte Murray and Lonnie Walker and maybe DeMar DeRozan, where, those are all guys who are going to be dribbling quite a bit. I think he would fit in quite nicely. So I've looked at this draft definitely more in terms of not just positional need, but who would be a great complementary piece for what the Spurs are building and what they, at least through what I've heard this offseason, are committed to not disrupting, and they want to just add to it.
Sure, and I think that's fair, and I like Saddiq Bey. Like, I'm not trying to bash him. He's a good player, and I think he really could fit into the Spurs quite well. He does have shooting skills. He's not like, I'm not trying to suggest he's a terrible defender. He's not. He's an intelligent team defender. He's someone who, he knows how to make all the right rotations, and he provides a little bit of value as someone who can rotate over from the weak side and give you a little bit of rim protection, or at least contest shots. So I don't think he's going to be a liability by any means. I don't think he's going to be all that switchable, but not a liability. But my thing with him is, if you look back on this class and you go, okay, we took, Saddiq Bey at 11 and then someone 12, 13, 14, they all end up being better players. Are you going to come to regret that? And if he is your guy, I think maybe it would be better to trade down, gain more assets, because I think this draft, while not super loaded on like top end talent, there's a ton of really solid role players from like the mid first round all the way even into the second round. There's guys who I think could play in the NBA from day one. So I think that might be a better move. But if they did take him at 11, I wouldn't be upset. I would just be underwhelmed, I think.
Yeah, right. I agree with you. And Tom, we talked about this all the time. I'm high on Saddiq Bey in the sense that I think he's a safe pick. I think we're going to look at Saddiq Bey. I think he's going to have a good NBA career. I don't know if he's ever going to make an all-star team, whatever that might be. But I think that Saddiq Bey is somebody that can come in, be a nice complementary piece, and really work himself into a nice role, to what Tom was saying. So if you want to kind of play it safe, and I agree with the trade down as well. You want to play it safe with a guy in this draft where there's a lot of uncertainty. I think Saddiq Bey is a great choice. Tyrese Halliburton, I think, is another guy where I think Halliburton is going to be a very good piece on whatever team he ends up on. Again, I don't necessarily know if he's all-star. He's definitely got a higher ceiling, in my opinion, than a guy like Saddiq Bey. But these are guys, when I watch them, I look at them, I'm just like, it's going to work out. Wherever they go, it's going to work out. I don't know how great it's going to work out, but they're going to figure it out. So, from a Saddiq Bey standpoint, like he seems like a guy who might fall into the perfect range of playing for a playoff team immediately and just like fit like a glove. So, for me, I don't know if that's necessarily what the Spurs need. I personally wouldn't hate the pick. I think that, especially in this draft, more leniency probably needs to be taken with, like, hindsight 2020 and retrospective thinking. Like, man, like, how could they have missed this person? I don't know, probably because there was a pandemic and they couldn't work out anybody, or games where we didn't have the March Madness tournament, where the March Madness tournament does, I think there's sometimes too much emphasis on how a person does in March Madness, right? Like Carson Edwards could not have played any better last season, and he's finding his way in Boston. But, it does help you in the respect that, like, if your team goes far, or maybe you're a guy at a mid-major school and you get to play up against a number 1 or number 2 seed, it's a game I like to watch and be like, okay, how are you going to do when there is a top-level team just building a game plan against you? How do you shine? So, that's like, think back to Steph Curry and his March Madness run. That's where it's sort of like, yeah, this guy's going to figure it out. Like, how he's going past some guys to 7. It's like, sometimes we overanalyze some things and we don't trust the film, or sometimes we try to go too deep into the intangibles, and sometimes the skill set that they provide at the school they're at don't accentuate the intangibles enough. So that's the difficult part of what we do.
Sure. And I think what I really want to know, I guess, because we've talked a bunch about like hypotheticals, but who, if y'all were the Spurs right now at 11, just realistic prospects, who would be your pick, each of you?
I mean, it depends on the board, but I think if they get any one of my list goes like this. Bey, I said, was my 8th wing. Mm-hmm. And then it goes Okoro, who is higher than that talent-wise, just as a basketball player. But I think for the Spurs, it's a little smaller. His deficiency
You're coming around on
is.
Okoro.
I am, but I still think he will, A, get drafted in the top 10, and B, fit better on another team that needs what he does a little more and can survive with him not shooting more. And then it's Patrick Williams, Devin Vassell slightly ahead of him just because he's a proven shooter at this point. And Patrick Williams, even though he's bigger and more versatile, is, still needs to work on the shooting. And if Obi Toppin falls, even with the defensive concerns, I mean, I would love to see him with the Spurs young core. But
here's my thing. Everyone's talking about the trading up. Nobody's mentioned the Spurs trading up for Obi Toppin. And so we've talked before, Tom and I, just about Okoro. Love Okoro, the prospect. Don't know if I love him for the Spurs, but I love Okoro. I'm more and more thinking that if the Spurs can get Obi Toppin, that would be a huge snag. Now, we all know Obi Toppin defensively is a liability. That's the big knock on him, and he's going to present some problems there. But if you're projecting this Spurs team 3 years down the line, the Spurs are going to be a dang good defensive team. Like, they are going to grow into a stingy defensive team. What they don't have now, once you remove maybe a LaMarcus or DeMar from the equation, they don't have a bucket getter. Once DeMar's gone, and even LaMarcus to an extent, but mostly DeMar, they don't have a guy who on a given possession can just go to the rim, get you points, or you're in a time of need in the fourth quarter, get me points. Obi Toppin's that guy. I think offensively speaking, he is, I think he's my favorite offensive prospect. I think he's going to come into the NBA day one and he can put up points. It's how can you mask the defensive deficiencies? And I think with the Spurs building what they're building right now, like if you had a lineup where it was DeJounte, Derek White, Keldon Johnson, and Lonnie Walker in the future, and you put Toppin in there, Toppin is now like, you can hide him in that lineup. You can absolutely hide him. So,
and the thing about his defense to me is like, he's a smart player. He's a crazy athletic player. How much of it is just lapses, and how much of it, because it looks like he's got moon shoes on offense and concrete shoes on defense. So how much of it is just buying in? Because he has the tools, he has the intelligence.
Yeah, I think he's going to be fine, like down the line. I mean, we saw with like LaMarcus Aldridge, obviously not a one-for-one comparison, but when he came to the league, he wasn't like some rim protecting, plus defender. He was not a great defender. He could get some blocks, but he wasn't a good defender. The LaMarcus Aldridge, who is on the Spurs now, I think is a very underrated rim protector. And I think if you have someone like Toppin, who's clearly more mobile at this stage of his career, and even if he's 22, he's still young. You can teach players to play better defense. You can't force someone to give effort, but I don't think that's the issue with him. I don't think it's effort. I think a lot of it is technique. He has a little bit of stiff hips, but he's fast. He's got good feet. He's a great athlete. I think you could hide him, and I think that's a great point. You could hide him. He's not going to be someone who it's like a Ja Okafor who can get you buckets, but is an outdated style of player who is also a defensive liability. I don't think that's what he is.
No, that's agreed. He is no way, shape, and form like a guy like an Okafor, even like a Wiseman, right? Like Wiseman, I think could be very successful in a given role, but I don't, maybe a couple of all-star appearances. You're gonna have to develop. You're gonna have to limit him to what he's doing, and it's not gonna be the sexiest role, but he can fulfill that role like to one of the best in the league. So that's where he's intriguing, but. Toppin has the ability to take over games. He's such a mismatch offensively, even given the fact that like he's going to be going up a level, obviously in competition. He was a late bloomer. And I mean, right. The Spurs took a late bloomer in Derek White, and look where his game's evolving. So I just think that, we hear, right, the Spurs thinking about 6 and the Hawks, and, the Hawks want to make the playoffs. They have to get ahead of the Knicks. Listening to Zach Lowe, I spread out in all the podcasts, but like as far as I want to just attribute this because someone on the podcast made a great point that with Leon Rice, like Toppin's not going below 8 with the Knicks. The Knicks will take Toppin because they have that bias built in for him and the way that they were, he was shopping before. So I just think that like Toppin going to the Spurs, like that would be a wow move, and I would freaking love it. I think that long term, Toppin could be a star in San Antonio with the way that they're building.
Obi Toppin, if the Spurs wind up with him, he'll certainly grow into becoming a better defender because Pop won't let him play if he's that much of a liability. And he could be like that pick that years, weeks, and hours after this draft, people are talking about how did he fall that far, even if it's not all the way to 11, even if it's down to 9. Now, one thing that I wanted to just mention was that, like, if the Spurs see that board at 11 and, they're not as high on a guy like Saddiq Bey or Killian Hayes, depending on who's available, if they're not feeling what's there at 11, they might try to trade back a little bit. I think they would be disappointed with that. I think a lot of Spurs fans would be disappointed with that. To me, that would kind of feel like, just knowing that you didn't get a yes from the girl you wanted to go to the dance with, and just punting it, and like, going, not even trying to get a real date, just like going with one of your friends. Like, it seems like the safest of safe moves. I would rather have Saddiq Bey at 11 than trade down for, say, like, Jalen Smith or Aaron Neesmith. Like, they would be fine. They would be good fits on the Spurs, but that would feel like a very disappointing result for what became of the 11th pick in the draft for the Spurs. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there, because there's so much excitement around this 11th pick. Everybody's like, it's the first lottery pick in 20 years. And rightfully so. People have every right to be excited. And if they end up trading it down, even if that might be a good idea, I think you just kind of deflate everyone in that fan base. It's like letting all the air out of a balloon. It's just going to be dead. And I think that may actually be kind of a bad thing for the Spurs in terms of like maintaining their fans and the excitement around what they are trying to build.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I put too much weight into the pomp and circumstance of the pick. Philosophically speaking, if they trade down, what are they going to get? They're probably going to get like a second round pick or something. Philosophically, I do not like trading down to get another second round pick. Probability speaking, second round picks rarely pan out. Not saying they don't, and we can point to tons of outliers of people who have shined and were slept on, and I get that. I'm not of the mode of trading pick 11. I'd rather you just pick there than like trade down to like 14 and then add a second round pick who's probably going to never see the light of day anyway. So that's just my thought process on that one. I'm with however the draft goes, I'm okay with kind of like whatever they do. I'm just any team that trades down to get like a second round pick in the NBA, I just don't think it's worth it.
Here's the only scenario for me where I would be cool with the Spurs trading down. If it's only like a few spots and the top player on their board at 11 would still be there at, say, 14. Celtics have 14, 26, and 30. Danny Ainge said that, he's trying to add some talent and make some moves. Might they package, say, 14 and a second, something like that, and the Spurs still get their guy and add another asset? If that's the move, again, it'll be kind of disappointing for Spurs fans, but certainly not as disappointing as getting a second rounder. And there's a lot of value to this 11 pick. Especially if teams are seeing guys that they like fall. There's a possibility that the Spurs would trade down from it, but I would see that as I would be disappointed in that outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I would be too. And speaking of second round picks, that kind of transitions me into this next topic. So, second rounders get overlooked, and I'm not saying that the Spurs 41st pick is going to become any of these guys, but 41st pick has churned out Nikola Jokic, Coutinho Mobley, and it's also got Eric Paschall, I think that's how you say his name, for the Golden State Warriors. So we know value can be found at the 41st pick. Are there any guys who y'all are interested in the second round who you think would be a good selection there at 41, or have y'all done any sort of research on the second rounders?
I'll say the name that immediately comes to mind. I don't know if he'll make it there. I don't know if anybody else. It's so tough to project into this draft.
Sure.
Like Bane. You mentioned Bane before. I love Bane. I think the steam is too hot on him. I think he's ended up going to get sniped in the first round somewhere. I love Isaiah Stewart. I think if the Spurs wanted to part with Jakob for a guy like Isaiah Stewart, he's not the sexiest player, but like he's going to be a guy that I think Spurs fans would freaking love. Just an absolute dog in the post, going to work his tail off, get boards. Doesn't really have much else to his game outside of rim protection and just having a mean streak about him on the glass. But having said that, I think that would give them something. As far as a guard that I like, who I think, again, I'm hearing a little bit more positive steam than maybe a few months ago, Malachi Flynn out of San Diego State / Washington State. He's really good. Really, I was working in Spokane, Washington, and covering Malachi when he was at Washington State under Ernie Kent. Under recruited dude, was a state of basketball winner. I forget what the award's called, but a guy that they just brought in, crushed it day one. Then he transferred to San Diego State, really filled out nicely. And if you watch San Diego State games last year, just was their guy. Really led the tempo of that team. I think he's got a great shot. I really like Flynn. So I don't know if necessarily he's going to be there at 41, but and same with Stewart. Like Jalen Smith is a guy that I know has been connected with the Spurs, but he's also a guy that's kind of maybe the end of the first round. But who knows if he drops? Like, I'm particularly not in love with Jalen Smith. I think he's maybe like a little bit more athletically gifted Jakob Poeltl. Also, like he can shoot 3-pointers. I'm not necessarily overly impressed with a lot of things that he does, but I can see the potential there. So, that's just sort of some names that pop into my head.
I disagree with you there on Jalen Smith. I like him a lot. I can't quite tell why he's so low on so many boards. He would obviously be a reach at 11. If they can get him at 41, that's a steal to me. I like him as a shot blocker. He averaged a double-double at school.
Yeah.
I mean, he was putting up like 15 and 11 a game and like 2 or 3 blocks. And if he kind of reminds me of like a Christian Wood type, less shot creation, but like if you take the complementary parts of Christian Wood's game, spaces the floor, lob threat, rim protector, I mean, that's what I get from Jalen Smith.
I just don't know if he runs as athletically as like a Wood does. Like I think he's a bit clunkier. I see it. There's parts of me where it's like, and maybe he just didn't go all out in every game, or I don't know. I mean, I actually recently watched like a couple of things on him. I think the last time we got on the Big Fun Pod, I think Jalen Smith came up and I said, I gotta really go back into him a little bit more. And I just remember watching and certainly having a guy that size shoot 3-pointers, and he's not bad at it. That's sexy. You want that in today's NBA. Certainly has a role in today's NBA, but defensively, outside of rim protecting, I think he could be a mismatch on guards. And that's like, when I'm watching him defensively, I just kind of see Jakob, like where you just like are like, man, like he looks awesome, and like he's getting in front of defenders, and then there's some times where he's just cooked, and like it didn't work out that game. So that's what I see is like, and again, I love Jakob, right? I love Jakob, but Jakob's not necessarily a game changer for the Spurs. I think he fits a nice role. So I think that's why I kind of, out of 11, I don't necessarily, and you agree with that. At 11, I don't really want somebody like that. But back end, sure.
I think some other names. I'm surprised you didn't mention Killian Tilly, Mr.
Oh,
Zags.
Tilly, it's so fun. I love Killian Tilly. You're right. I do.
Yeah.
I think his injury history has knocked him down, but the dude, whenever he has played, first off, his 3-point shot is incredible. Limited amount, but he's been very successful in his career shooting 3-pointers. If you want to go back and look at the tape at him at the WCC tournament a couple of years ago, he was the tournament MVP. And I think he made like 13 threes in a row or something. It was nuts. But he's, his family comes from a volleyball family. They're like professionals, and he has, I think, tremendous range as far as shot blocking goes, and like defensively speaking. I think like he can really do well, and he's got quick feet in that regard. He was somebody who I don't think necessarily. All his brothers played volleyball, and he went the different route. So I think it took him a litit's bit longer, even though he went to a great program in Gonzaga. I think if he wasn't injured, he would not be in his draft because he would have declared a while ago. But it's funny you bring up Tilly because I can't believe I blanked on him and bringing him up. But I love Tilly. I think he would fit perfect with the Spurs as a late pick. Like, you get your wing player, a guy who can put up points, who can fit in defensively. I don't know how quick his feet are. I'll mention that, but thank you for bringing up Tilly.
Yeah, Killian is one of my favorites too. I actually wrote about him today, kind of a shameless plug there, but I think he's an excellent value at 41. And you said he would have declared a while ago if he was healthy. I think that's true. And I think if he didn't have his injury history, I consider him to be a lottery or near lottery talent in this class. I think just because of the injury concerns and the concerns that he may have to be on a minutes restriction for his entire career, that kind of hurts his value, but he's a great passer. Like, as far as big men passers go in this draft, you're not really going to do much better. He is intelligent shooting, like an intelligent passer. He's an intelligent defender, and he may not be like the quickest guy, but he does have good feet. He knows what to do on the defensive end. I don't have any concerns with him outside of those injuries. So I think he would be a great fit for San Antonio. I like him. I like someone like Paul Reed, maybe a little bit of an upside swing, but I think that's not really a big deal at like a second round pick. To me, Paul Reed at his upside swing at a second round pick would be a fine value. And I don't know how much y'all have seen of Paul Reed, but I'm pretty high on him.
My analysis on Paul Reed would be about as useless as on election night when they've got the big board in the match and they say we're still waiting for everything to come in. It would be like as useless as that, but also I didn't know what Pennsylvania was. So I'll leave that one to you. With this second round, it's a crapshoot really who's going to be available when. Xavier Tillman is another interesting guy. Daniel Oturo, if they're going for bigs. But like if they address positional need on the wing or with a big man with that 11th pick or whatever they traded for, I say take highest upside available at 41, whoever it is. And I am not the person to ask who that is.
Yeah, I like Tillman too. That was a good nod.
Yeah, Tillman, I think, is also an excellent player. We saw him as, upperclassmen often get undervalued when we're looking at draft prospects, but he's someone who may not be elite at like any one thing, but he brings a lot to the table. He's also another guy who's really smart as a basketball.
I saw some insane on-off numbers for him today. It was absolutely ridiculous the impact that he had on that Michigan State team, even if it didn't always show up in the box score. He's one of those like do the little things guys.
That's like, and going back sort of to the bigger point, if they wanted to let Jakob go, I think they can find his replacement fairly easily in this draft, right? Like I think that there are guys later in this draft who fulfill a quieter role of rim protection and just kind of like guarding the paint in that regard. So just a thought out there. I love Jakob. His on-off numbers prove his worth in some regard. Jakob's one of those guys where if against less talented teams, he takes advantage of you. Against more talented teams, he kind of hides. Kind of worries me when you think about like playoffs and stuff down the line, how he's going to thrive in one of those environments when it's locked down all the time. But, I'm still willing to ride with Jakob at the right price.
So I think who the Spurs draft in this draft might be instructive on what they think is going to happen in free agency a couple days after the draft, or down the road with LaMarcus Aldridge. If they get a guy like Wiseman, you can probably assume Jakob Poeltl's going to walk. But what about if it's Toppin or Okongwu? What about if it's Pat Williams? If they don't trade LaMarcus Aldridge, does Jakob Poeltl want to stay? I agree with you that they can find a cheaper rim protector in this draft, a younger developmental piece, if they want to go that route. I think it's just because this offseason, it's also compressed, right? We're going to know, is DeMar opting in or out a couple days before the draft, which is a couple days before free agency. And I'm sure Jakob has been talking to the Spurs about, what, like, I know that, sorry, Dottie wants to tune in. Dottie, can you not? Dottie is
big Jakob Poeltl fan. Wants to hear none of it.
No, she's got a good wingspan, and the motor, the physical tools are all there. It's just a question about her love from the game and opposable thumbs. Sorry about that. But yeah, I think that when it comes down to that, the Spurs have a good idea what DeMar wants to do at this point, I would guess. And they're looking at the board that way. And I'm sure they have some idea what Jakob Poeltl wants to do. So we'll see how they draft and how that impacts the free agency decisions that they make after this.
Definitely. I think for me, one of the questions I wanted to ask y'all while I have y'all here is, we know that the G League has kind of been integral to their developmental system for the Spurs, and we don't know if there's going to be a G League season next year. Do you think that impacts how they draft? I don't really think it will, because I think if you're at 11, that guy's probably not going to be in the G League. But if y'all had to guess, would you say it would not or would affect how they end up drafting?
No, it wouldn't. I don't think it would at all. And, I don't want to make the G League into, I think there are some people out there who don't put enough value in the G League. And then I think there's some people out there that put way too much value in the G League. The G League is a part of the developmental pie, right? And so we have learned that for a guy maybe like Keldon Johnson, let's say this year, all of us, we all saw Keldon do what he was doing in the G League. And after like 5 or so games, he's better than everybody else. He's just better than everybody else down there. I don't know if the reps are necessarily necessary. I mean, if they're trying to make him more comfortable in the system, and that's what I like about the Spurs, is that they can kind of make some mistakes down there. My biggest thing about the G League, and this is going to be a long-winded answer to you saying, no, I don't think it's going to matter. But in life, in general, right? We all get repetitions. We all want to, like for me, being a sports reporter, I had to work in Fargo, North Dakota for a couple of years. I went up to Spokane, Washington for 4 years. Now I'm in San Antonio. If you would have took me out of college and brought me to San Antonio, I would have made a lot of mistakes, and they would have been more glaring because it's a bigger stage and there's a different amount of pressures. Would I have been able to figure it out? Maybe my confidence might have been so shaken though that it would have been, halted and stunted, and I might have went into a different direction. That's what, like, the G League is part of that. Hey, get comfortable. Hey, make mistakes. We just want you to enter the industry eased into the process and not feeling like you're flooded to be, live up to your pick, live up to that number that you were selected on. We see it with Luka Šamanić. I'm not saying that the G League is going to fix Luka Šamanić, nor the reps are going to make him into Giannis Antetokounmpo one day. But it is very clear that having Luka down there in a G League right now is important because he needs reps, because it's just not clicking right now. And the game's moving way too fast for him, whereas a guy like Keldon, it's not. And there could be a multitude of reasonings for that. But ultimately, I don't think that the G League is going to have this grandiose effect on who they draft, why they draft them, whatever it might be. I think if we wanted to put too much emphasis in it, you might see them draft someone of a higher age / more NBA ready. so that at least they can bring him into camp and keep him with the team, and that they know that that's okay. But again, I don't think it's a factor. And I think the G League is something that's, probably underutilized in the NBA as a whole. And it's hard to argue that, like, the Spurs and their usage of the G League has not been successful. And some people will say, well, they would have been successful anyway. You can't prove that. You cannot prove that. I can go through a litany of picks where people have flamed out immediately. And who knows, if they went down to the G League just to buy some time, they would have figured it out. But pressure and all this stuff got to them, or things just moved too fast and they gave up on them. I mean, we see it in the NFL all the time too. Like Dwayne Haskins was drafted number 1 a year ago, and he's already cooked. Done. You don't want them. So it's just like, I just find it like in sports, we just kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit about like, you need to produce now versus like sending somebody down there. So that's my Spurs in the G League thought bubble has to me, no impact on the draft.
So I also don't think it's going to impact the way that the Spurs draft. I think it might impact the way that they choose to develop whoever they draft, and if they get him more in-game reps in the NBA, it might force them to do that, which I'm sure a lot of Spurs fans who would have liked to see Keldon Johnson brought along earlier would love to see. But I mean, let's think about it like this, guys. Even if you take the Kawhi trade where they got him at 15 from the Pacers, Spurs haven't had a draft pick this high since 97. Drink every time you hear that this week, because you'll hear it a lot. D-League was founded in 2001. So the Spurs have not had a draft pick this high since the D-League was invented. So because of that, even if this was not a year where COVID threatens the playing of G League games, this is a year where whoever the Spurs pick at 11 or higher would be playing with the team more from day one. And I kind of liked what Evan, you said about drafting an older guy, not for the reason that he'll need less time in the G League, but because he's a better fit age and experience wise with the Spurs young core. If you're building a young core, right, and say we want to take DeJounte Murray as the start of that, you draft a 19-year-old. They drafted him in 2016, right? They've been building to that young core building at a match in age a little bit. You don't want to just keep getting the youngest guy in the draft and hoping he turns into something. Somebody posted that Family Guy clip of like, wait, you could get the boat, or you could take what's in the mystery box. It's like, well, obviously we're taking the boat. It's like, well, no, like what could be in the mystery box? It might even be a boat, So that's sort of what's happening here, I think, to a certain degree. But I think that whoever the Spurs take in this draft, it would surprise me if it was somebody who was not impactful in their first season. Like if they went with a guy like Poku, that would shock me. I understand the interest in him as a prospect, but I don't see the Spurs picking a guy like that who wouldn't be able to contribute day one. If they pick a 19-year-old, it's going to be a 19-year-old whose body, at least, and game in some regard is NBA ready. And I think that's just how the board looks, really. But every one of these guys is a project in one way or another. Nobody is a finished deal.
And there's something to be said with what Tom said about Poku, and we've talked about it before, Tom and I. Just they took their home run shot with Šamanić. It's going to be hard to imagine that they're going to take another dart like that. But even beyond that, there is maybe, if they have a developmental plan and that's going to be stunted by the fact that there's no G League games, maybe that gives them pause to not take a guy like Poku. But like in the grand picture, I think they'll still be able to develop the way they want to develop somebody without the G League necessarily. But yeah, I don't necessarily think taking a guy like that during these times is the smartest.
Yeah, I'm pretty much of the same mindset. I don't really think it's going to change how they draft. And even if I wouldn't be like entirely surprised if they took someone like Poku, but I don't think they would. I'm high on him, but I also am of the mindset that he's going to be a long-term project and not just somebody who is going to need like a year in the G League. He's someone who's like 2 years away from being 2 years away. And maybe not literally, but he's going to take a long time to get to where he needs to be physically. We know he has a lot of gifts, but he's definitely not going to be a day one contributor. And I think that is important for the Spurs because we have Popovich, but how long do we have him for, right? We're probably looking at somebody who can help them make a playoff push because I bet you they owe Pop that at the very least.
Yeah. It would shock me if they took an even more slender European than Luka Šamanić this year. When you have 2 first-round picks like they did last year, makes sense to take a big swing on one guy and get a safer pick with your second. I think Poku's probably going to wind up in one of those 3 Celtics picks because they're a team that will feel fine taking a swing on a guy like that. But I think you're right that he's the kind of player who, and especially with his body the way it is, like it really looks like a stiff breeze could break him in half at the waist. Or knees or ankles, really any sort of joint in his body. It looks like it's just hanging on. So, I mean, he's skilled, he's cool, he's fun to watch in the 7 total minutes of tape that exist of his game. It's fun, it's cool. And he could be very special one day, but that's a wonderful journey for somebody else. Love that journey for the Boston Celtics, not really for the Spurs.
Yeah, I think it would be tough for the Spurs to do that. Even in the developmental system they have, it's like I said, it's going to take a long time. And he weighs as much as Bryn Forbes, but he's like 7'1", so that's not ideal. That's far.
Is that real? That's not hyperbolic. That's
canon. That's canon. He's 205 pounds, so he weighs as much as Bryn Forbes, but he is 7'1", so he's huge and he's thin and almost concerningly so. So he's someone who I'm high on in terms of his potential, but I'm just not sure that it would be in the Spurs' best interest to go after someone like that for sure. And if they did want to take a home run swing, and this is a guy I'm not super high on either, but like Jaden McDaniels, someone who has a lot of interesting skill set for a guy his size, but he has some
go back to UW route.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. With me, for him, where I worry is his mindset. Like we saw him take himself out of games when he wasn't playing well on offense. He would just not even compete on the defensive end. And then we saw him take questionable shots at best, try to do too much with the ball. And so that would be a guy who I worry about as well. Even if they would draft him, he would be someone in my mind, really the only other guy who would be realistic for them, who would end up going to the G League, because everyone else I think that they would be targeting could be day one guy contributing right away.
Yeah, I totally agree. And McDaniels is a good example of when I say if a scout focused too much on intangibles versus what you see. I always lean on sometimes what you see, like not getting into like analytics and all that stuff. I don't have access to that. I'm sure there's a bunch of fancy stuff out there. I'd love to see it. But as far as what I do in my role, like intangibles are a part of the process, but it doesn't take up the entire form of scouting. Like when I watched McDaniels and watched him last year too, I just underwhelmed. Like everyone like talked him up. He was supposed to be this big prospect, so you go in with expectations, and it's every time it was just kind of meh.
Evan, I test Closky in the house.
That's right. Sometimes I just think we overcomplicate things, and that's welcome to 2020. But
yeah, I think basically my philosophy with this draft for the Spurs, there are probably top 12 players in this draft that if the Spurs wound up with any one of them through any series of events, the organization and fans would view it as a win. And if they had to settle for anything else, or if they decided to settle for anything else, you would have all the buildup of this high pick for some level of disappointment for at least some people. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think that there's really enough chatter going around about potential trades that something's gonna happen. Breaking news alert! Something might happen. Whoa, mind-blowing stuff. But yeah, that's Spurs, baby.
I just want to add one addendum. I don't think we said this, but every year it seems like, oh, this could be the year the Spurs make a big move, and then it doesn't happen. So don't ever get your hopes up too high.
But when have you ever heard it like this, though? Be honest.
No, you're right. No, you're right. I think there is definitely a difference between what every other year has been like versus this year. I'm just saying the brand has usually taught us, don't ever run away with this thought because you're probably going to get let down. So I'm saying there's a little bit more hope this year, but history seems to tell us that they don't usually do anything. But this is a fork in the road type season. They have tons of cap room after the year. They have 2 players on a 1-year deal if DeMar opts in. It just seems like this is the perfect storm where it makes so much sense to set up your organization moving forward. And a thought I've always had, and I haven't necessarily landed on the right player, is to trade for somebody who has that all-star potential, who's under contract for a few years, and see if you can turn them around. That just, for the Spurs, I just think this is the best move.
So you do you believe in the Andrew Wiggins reclamation project?
No, I don't necessarily believe in the Andrew Wiggins reclamation product or the idea of it. But if it was a move where you get Wiggins and some assets with it, like a first rounder, whatever it might be,
well, that would be the swap for 2. It would probably have to be to make the money work.
Yeah,
2 for Aldridge and Wiggins goes to the salary dump.
I mean, I probably would want more than 2 if I'm giving you. Am I keeping 11?
Right.
Like if I'm giving you 11, like Wiggins and 2 doesn't just do it for me. Like, I'm sorry. If you're the Warriors, I know you want to get bailed out of this number 2 pick. You're looking for an impactful piece and whatever it might be. Like, I need another first rounder with that because that Wiggins contract, I don't want any part of it. I'll take him on. I will for the right assets. Number 2 and something else, I'm in. So, I don't think if the Spurs are going to go this route, you have to accept that they're not going to be like a great team right away. So just give me Wiggins. He'll put up points. The team will stink and whatever. You get some assets and you build for a couple more years. And if you reach the end of his contract and he's got 1 year left and it's expiring, then you trade an asset, get rid of him, build something, and make your push. So I'm okay with them taking Wiggins if you're getting the right pieces back in that trade. I'm not anti-Wiggins as far as an asset deal. But there has to be an incentive.
Right.
I don't want to just bail the Warriors out. Like, you made that deal. You got to live in that.
Because the Warriors have said, we want to add veteran leadership and solid players this offseason. Mm-hmm. And if they want to do that and still keep a lottery pick, the only trade really that I can think of that does that for them is with the Spurs or maybe the Celtics. But I mean, if there is serious interest there, and the Spurs can find some way to hold on to 11, give up 41 maybe. I don't know. I also
I'm in on that.
I also like the flexibility that the Spurs have with not having an albatross contract like Andrew Wiggins on the books.
What are they using that money on? They're just going to use the money to sign their own people. They're going to have to give Derek White an extension. They're going to have to give, Lonnie some money at some point. The cap is going to be built where they got to pay their people, but then literally LaMarcus is it on the wire. So I mean,
you don't think they're going to make a run at Giannis?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to get Giannis.
I don't think so either. I really don't think they're going to go after Giannis either. And I'm not sure a trade's going to happen either. I know that we've been talking about it. There's been a lot of rumblings, and it would be exciting if they do. But I don't know. I think that's something that we're just going to have to monitor, and it's going to be something that it either happens and it surprises everybody, or it doesn't, and it's back to normal.
I think if it happens, though, it shouldn't surprise you too much. It should surprise you less than it would have in any other year. If it happens this time, it might be like, wow, they actually did something. But I think if you've been sort of reading the tea leaves and, between the lines and trying to figure out what's going on here, at the very least, they're kicking the crap out of those tires, man.
Yep.
So, we'll see if they drive off in anything. But the fact that they're even on the lot is news in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a situation worth monitoring. And I feel like we've talked all the draft we can possibly talk, first rounders, second rounders, potential trades. So thank you both again for showing up, talking with me about the draft, prepping everybody with prospect names and potential trade ideas. But this is kind of the part of the show where I love to kind of hand it over to y'all. What are you working on? Where can people find you? And, what are your Twitter @? Let people know where they can follow you.
Tom, you go first because you had that great draft piece today.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Evan. Very sweet of you to say. Yeah, I did put together a draft guide that goes over a lot of what we talked about here today. And that's not necessarily the top 5 guards in the draft, but my top 5 guards for the Spurs, and then my top 10 wings and bigs. Also have a huge mega story on just all of the off-season things for the Spurs, the questions they need to answer. And we've got the latest news on Tim Duncan not coming back as an assistant coach. All the latest Spurs news you'll be able to find on KENS5.com. And on Twitter, I'm at @RealTomPetrini. I'm going to toss it over to Emmy winner, Evan Closky. How you doing, Evan? Where can the people find you on?
I love the love we send to each other. I appreciate that. At Evan Closky, EVANCLOSKY. I'm usually, especially during games, talking Spurs nonstop. And then mostly this weekend, we will be doing something on the TV end just to kind of enlighten the audience of what to expect. It's going to be it won't be as in depth as we go here. It's gonna be very cut and dry, but that you can expect that as well on KENS5.com, and you can always find Spurs coverage there.
I forgot that we actually got go ahead on we're gonna do live show for draft night. So we're gonna be streaming on @bigfunpod on Twitter and other platforms. So that'll be really fun, and we'll walk through in real time what's going on, who's on the board, and talk through a Spurs pick. So that'll be a fun time.
Definitely. And check out everything that both these guys are doing. Awesome Spurs coverage, awesome news coverage. And one last thank you for showing up and talking with me, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, man. It's talking Spurs. Wouldn't miss it. Thank you for having us.
And another huge shout out to the guys from the Big Fundamental podcast for joining me on my channel to talk NBA draft. They're excellent at their Spurs coverage. They're excellent with San Antonio news coverage. So check everything they're doing out. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button if you want to know what's coming next on this channel. And most importantly, get excited for the 2020 NBA draft. We're 1 week away from finding out who is going to be wearing silver and black and maybe those Fiesta colors very soon. I'm excited. You should be too. And until next time, guys, take care.